From the dark corridors of the Agroprom to the secret rooms of the X-Labs, the forgotten basement of Pripyat, and the depth of the legendary sarcophagus. Over the span of 9 videos, we have covered all the major underground locations from the S.T.A.L.K.E.R trilogy. But that series stands incomplete, for a conclusion is missing. Hello Stalkers and welcome to the Anomalous Dugout. In this video, we will finally close the Secret Underground Areas playlist with the last and 10th episode. Obviously major spoilers ahead. First of all, we shall recap all the important information we gathered in the previous entries, and then I will discuss some of the remaining mysteries and unanswered questions about the underground locations. So, what did we learn while exploring the dark tunnels of the zone? Let's start with the origins of the underground locations.
The Chernobyl zone was not used as a testing site for experiments until 1989.
Because of the words of the Sea Consciousness representative, it is commonly assumed that the X laboratories were built between 1989 and 1991, after the original Chernobyl disaster, but before the fall of the Soviet Union. However, we know that some of the foundations for the labs and the research was actually present before the disaster of 1986. For example, the Agroprom Institute was originally established in the 1960s, but it was later rehabilitated to house some of the experiments. Something similar happened to the Jupiter factory, which secretly produced military-grade components between 1980 and 1986, before becoming a supplier for the X-Labs, most notably for manufacturing the early batches of Gauss rifles. There is also the Yentar factory, which is said to have been there before both disasters, and so on. The fact that old buildings were reused to house the labs could explain why they are so far apart from each other. Visiting the underground locations obviously gave us some ideas about the kind of experiments that were conducted. It seems that everything started with the studies on psi emissions. Scientists had been trying to implement simple commands in the minds of animals before, but the discovery of psi emissions led to a series of breakthroughs. First of all, the informational field known as the noosphere was discovered. This field apparently contains the consciousnesses and thoughts of all living beings gifted with cognitive abilities. Some of the brightest minds working in the zone believed that if they could interact with the noosphere, they would be able to remove negative emotions from mankind, thus creating a better humanity. In an attempt to make this dream come true, a special team known as the Group was created, with members such as Lebedev, Kalancha, Suslov, and Shubko. Eventually the group made huge progress, and the consciousnesses of 7 researchers were connected together, creating a super being called the Common Consciousness. Unlike normal persons, the Sea Consciousness was able to modify the noosphere, but their plan did not work as intended, and the experiment failed with disastrous consequences, giving birth to the Anomalous zone. Even though the actions of the group left the biggest mark on the zone, many other secret projects also took place, and it is even possible that some of the science teams from different labs did not work together, but instead as competitors. In any case, we know that the emissions linked to the noosphere were studied, and in particular psi emissions. In my opinion, psi emissions are just one type of emissions among the many emissions connected to the noosphere, but I could be wrong. Laboratory X-18 focused on studying the effects of these emissions on test subjects, creating some of the mutants in the process. X-16 researched the ability of living creatures to generate psi emissions, developing a functioning biological psi emitter. In the end, machines seemed to surpass the living, as a completely non-organic psi antenna, known as the Kamenov emitter, was built in X-19, which later became known as the Brain Scorcher. An even further evolution of the psi emitter concept is the device known as the Monolith, or Wish Granter, which was set up in the sarcophagus. This legendary crystal is just a well-crafted hallucination, baiting the stalkers to their death. Meanwhile, the development of the Gauss rifle, an electromagnetic weapon, also took place. These are just the experiments that we know of, but I am sure that there are much more, because many parts of the underground locations are inaccessible, and there are surely other labs that we don't visit in the games. Other experiments might have involved the development of special food items, the study of anomalies and artifacts, teleportation, brainwashing, sound waves in the case of Limansk, and who knows what else. One important thing that we discovered inside the labs is the fact that chemicals were used in the experiments. Most notably in Lab X-18, it is possible to find special containers for the unknown substances. However, some crates marked with radioactive and chemical hazard signs can also be found all over the zone. Considering the great amount of tubes, pipes, barrels and tanks seen in almost all the underground locations, I believe that these unknown chemicals were used pretty much everywhere as an integral part of the experiments. Indeed, it is very likely that the mutants created in Lab X-18 and possibly in other labs were made by testing both the noosphere emissions and the strange chemicals on living subjects. Other uses for the chemicals might have included the growth of the large brain in X-16, the mutation of the controllers, and even perhaps the formation of anomalies. In fact, it seems that certain types of anomalies are prone to spawn in certain environments when some conditions are met. For example, electric anomalies often appear near transformers or power lines. In the case of the underground locations, we were able to spot a lot of fruit punches as well as burners. The first could be directly linked to spills of the unknown chemical stuff used in the experiments, while the second may be connected to the fact that these chemicals were potentially hot and flammable. This would also explain why the psi devices work in cycles, sometimes requiring to turn down their power in order to cool down. Last but not least, I speculated that the purpose of the Agroprom Underground, which unlike the labs has always been unclear, was to be a chemical plant to produce and store the said chemical substances. Then on to the disaster that struck the underground locations. It is easy to imagine that the laboratories were abandoned because of the second Chernobyl disaster. In other words, the appearance of the Anomalous zone in 2006. Yet we found clues showing that some labs continued to work for some time after the anomalies were born. Crates found in X-18 and X-16 sometimes contain artifacts, and the documents regarding the production of the Gauss rifle at the Jupiter factory clearly states that the project was going on while the anomalies were present. It is in fact the power of electro-artifacts that allowed the weapon to be adapted to the size of a regular soldier, by providing enough power in a small battery. Finally, the investigation carried out at the Agroprom revealed that the Institute was a cover-up for X-Labs from 2005 to 2008, although it is possible that the dates are a mistake. Regardless, I think that many laboratories were able to continue their secret work after the zone was formed, and they were abandoned for other reasons. Breakout of mutant test subjects in X-18, Psi-emitter going crazy in X-16, the scientists covering their tracks and leaving, all sorts of things could have happened. For instance, we know that the Jupiter factory was deliberately abandoned when the production of the Gauss gun was transferred to unspecified underground facilities, using the large network of tunnels known as the Pripyat Underpass, which is rumored to be connecting many of the labs together. We also know that X8 was left by the group when they decided to move their headquarters in another lab named X7. It appears that the scientists left some of their facilities in an attempt to hide from the military and the ever-growing number of stalkers. On top of that, we can speculate that the earthquakes provoked by the emissions dealt some damage to certain structures, accelerating the evacuation of the said underground areas. Nonetheless, it is not out of the question that some laboratories are still in activity while the events of the games take place. The Monolith Control Center, where the illusion of the Monolith device was made, was one example. I would not be surprised if there are other Eden Hex labs in operation, providing the Monolith faction with weapons and equipment, including food, ammo for the Gauss rifle, exoskeletons, and who knows what else. Moreover, the sea consciousness was seen using pyrogeists as a defense mechanism, so it is possible that mutants are still being created in the labs and sent into the zone to cause trouble for both stalkers and the military. As for the labs that were abandoned, they still contain very valuable information and assets to many different factions. Ecologists and the army are understandably interested, in addition to the mercenaries, but also the loaders working for the traders and even the bandits. The Monolith is also trying to capture these strategic points in order to protect the secrets of the zone, as well as to easily travel underground and strengthen their faction by acquiring new technologies. Traces of Monolith presence can be found in X18 with bodysuits, X16 with many corpses, and the testing workshop with a stash. Besides, the Brain Scorcher, Sarcophagus and Pripyat Underpass were more or less under the control of the Monolith faction as well. Furthermore, some locations have also been raided by the player himself and by the Ukrainian Special Forces. The soldiers started their investigation at Agroprom, then went down into X18 and X16, landed at the Brain Scorcher, and tried unsuccessfully to capture the power plant. We don't know if the military was able to hold on to any of the targeted locations, so the fate of these labs remains a mystery for now. Surely we will learn more about both the abandoned and still running laboratories in Stalker 2. Is the government aware of the X-Labs? While the actions of the Ukrainian military and the SBU seem to show that the government was unaware of all the experiments going on in the zone, there is some evidence to show that the army and the officials must have been connected to the labs somehow. From the seemingly unlimited fundings and resources received, to the suits of the personnel being similar to the suits provided to the ecologists, something is clearly suspicious. However, My theory is that it was the Soviets who initiated all the research programs in the zone. Remember that the Soviet Union still existed back in 1989. Therefore, it is possible that when Ukraine gained its independence after the collapse of the Union in 1991, the newly created government was never informed of what was going on in Chernobyl, and the information was classified and kept hidden by the former Soviet officials. This may explain why some rare Russian weapons can be found in some of the labs, and more importantly, why the Ukrainian military and special services are investigating the zone. In my opinion, its secrets were simply buried and never passed on to the new generation of Ukrainian leaders. They probably had some idea that strange things were going on in the area, but did not know exactly what it was. The appearance of the Anomalous zone in 2006 forced them to take a closer look at it, hence all the military operations seen in the games. Why do the labs look so old? If my previous assumption is correct, then it is very likely that the funding and resources provided by the USSR to the X-Labs stopped after 1991, at least officially. In that case, the scientists who decided to continue to work down there had to manage their research with a lot of shortcomings. Less money, less staff, less equipment, all of this while working clandestinely. Because of this lack of support from unofficial sources, the laboratories would have been poorly administered and maintained as far back as 1992, with the researchers focusing their efforts on keeping the important machines working rather than the rest of the facilities. This is, in my opinion, why the laboratories look like they've been abandoned for a very long time, despite the fact that most of them were only left out for around 6 years, if not less. In reality, the labs were already in a bad condition when the scientists were still working in them. But who knows, that's just my personal interpretation. And finally, about the origins of the mutants. We saw earlier that Laboratory X-18 was clearly involved in the making of mutants, by exposing test subjects to both emissions from the noosphere and dangerous chemicals. The mutants we met in this lab were in particular the poltergeists and a pyrogeist, who seem to have escaped from one of the pods. Yes, I believe that the mutant embryos found in these tubes are actually pyrogeists. This would make sense because one of the pods is empty and we find a pyrogeist in the room, while the door was locked down. Besides, we do not know what the physical body of the pyrogeist looks like, or at least what it used to look like, which checks out with the fact that the embryos are different from any other mutants seen in the games. Anyway, the humanoid monsters usually found in the labs are quite different from the other mutated animals found in the zone, as they are gifted with incredible abilities, such as telekinesis, floating around, throwing fire, you name it. One of my theories is that such powers were gained because the test subjects were given the right combination of noosphere emissions and toxic substances. Psi emissions and other phenomenons leaking from the noosphere, anomalies in short, can be found everywhere in the zone. Somehow the same goes for those crates of unknown chemicals, which can be seen laying around in almost every location, from Lebedev's office back in the Great Swamp all the way to the sarcophagus itself. It could be that these boxes are used by stalkers to safely store artifacts, but we cannot overlook the fact that many are found in X-18 and even more in the sarcophagus. I believe that somehow all this stuff came from the secret labs and was scattered all across the zone. So my theory here is that new mutations are caused every day because of these elements: psi emissions, anomalies, and the chemicals that are extremely widespread throughout the zone. While separated, they will over time give birth to lesser mutants without supernatural powers, such as simple blind dogs, boars, maybe even snorks. But if these elements are found together, it would somewhat recreate the conditions that were tested in the labs and from which the first humanoid mutants were born. And that is when the craziest mutations will occur, forming monsters like the Psy-Dog, the Controller, or the Burer. Throw in a bit of good old radioactivity in the mix, and you can imagine the results. Something else about the mutants which is very important, but I never really mentioned before, is the fact that the creatures appear to be under some sort of subtle mind control. It is implied in several occasions that the behavior of mutants towards stalkers is sometimes very strange, as if the monsters tried to defend the secrets of the zone. For example, dutiers in Clear Sky explain that as soon as they started to dig into the mysteries of the Agroprom Institute and its underground, hordes of snorks, bloodsuckers, and even pseudo-giants started to crawl out from the tunnels to attack them every night. Similarly, waves of mutants can be seen coming out of the Dark Valley and from beyond the border of the Brain Scorcher. In addition, mutants consistently raid scientific expeditions, as proven in Call of Pripyat by Professor Ozersky and Major Dektyrev. Besides, zombified stalkers sometimes show a similar behavior, as they are very aggressive and will mindlessly assault Yontar's bunker on a regular basis. Therefore, it is possible that, just like zombies, mutants are being influenced by psi emissions, especially since they do not seem to suffer from them. Perhaps they are already partially zombified. In some instances, the zombies and mutants could also be used as bodyguards by a nearby controller. Yet there is one major difference between zombies and mutants, which is the fact that the former are neutral with Monolith, when the latter are not. This implies that, unlike zombified people, the creatures of the zone are subject to a much more subtle form of mind control, possibly implanted in their subconsciousness through a manipulation of the noosphere. This could explain why mutants are found guarding the underground laboratories. Not only they make it their lair, but they also feel the urge to defend it, because of an outside influence on their brain. Even more striking, the defense mechanism of the Monolith Control Center consists of spawning pyrogeists. Sure, all of this simply remains a theory for now, but I would not be surprised if it proved to be correct in the upcoming Stalker 2. Anyway, I think this video and thus this whole series has come to an end. I would love to read about your feedback, thoughts and own theories about all of this, so make sure to leave a comment down below. It was truly a great journey to make all of these videos about the secret underground locations, so I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. I'll see you in the next video, Stalker. Take care and goodbye.